Welcome to the Authority File, the podcast where you'll hear conversations with academic librarians, technologists, researchers, and authors whose work is laying the foundation for higher education's future. I'm Bill Mickey, your host and the editorial director at Choice. In this 4-part series, which is brought to you with support from Overdrive, I'll be speaking with our guests on everyone's favorite scholarly content delivery format, open access. We examine the current state of open access, including the opportunities and pain points for academic librarians, publishers, and researchers. We also look at the role librarians play in supporting open access initiatives, including how that role will continue to play out. Further, we talk about OA funding and its sustainability and look ahead at some important milestones on the horizon. Joining me on the program are Emily Farrell, Global Commercial Director for Open Research at Taylor & Francis, and Jenny Towns, Open Access Librarian at Emory University. In this first episode, we're introduced to our guests, and I asked them to define the core benefits and challenges of OA, as it stands today, for libraries, publishers, and researchers. Okay, Jenny and Emily, welcome to the program.
Hi.
Hi. Thanks, Bill.
Sure. So let's start with introductions, as we typically do on this show. Can you start talking about your current roles and responsibilities? And Jenny, let's start with you.
All right. Thank you. My name is Jenny Towns. I am the Open Access Librarian at Emory University. First and foremost, I am primarily an advocate for all things open. I act as an advocate for the Emory campus in helping faculty choose educational resources, from developing a program of open education practices, all the way down to managing our open access publishing fund. Currently, I'm building an open education program at Emory and managing the open access publishing fund.
What's the open education component of that, Jenny?
I'm right at the very beginning, and so
Yeah.
I'm creating an action plan with the help of the Open Education Network. And I think what it's going to consist of is working with our version of Center for Teaching and Learning, and to create different types of workshops that we can deploy either synchronously or asynchronously for faculty throughout the year.
Okay, excellent. And then Emily, how about you?
I'm Emily Farrell. I am the Global Commercial Director for Open Research at Taylor & Francis. And that means that generally I am working across the globe, looking at the different ways that we're working on open access, on open research, and specifically on how the business models that we use, what they are, how those are evolving in collaboration with different partners. So a lot of work with libraries, but also working with funders, with institutions in different directions, and that includes books, journals, and then also the model we work with F1000. So it's as Jenny said, similarly, it's sort of all things open in all directions, but in particular, really looking at how we make that sustainable and how we fund open access.
Right. So just a quick follow-up on that, being in a global position, how do you sort of, keep track might not be the right way to say it, but, the different sort of approaches in different regions across the world, in terms of mandates and that kind of thing? Like, how do you kind of keep a handle on all that?
Yeah, look, it's not a small task, that's for sure.
Yeah.
And I think it's incredibly important to constantly pay attention to that dialogue, both of the different sorts of mandates and policies in different regions, how those do and sometimes don't match up, and what the effect is locally. We're lucky enough to have a lot of fantastic partnerships around the world. And, through those partnerships, through the collaborations, the really open discussions we try to have with libraries, that's part of how we manage to sort of keep on top of it and make sure that we're paying attention to the needs of ultimately the researchers. So, certainly a balance, but I think because it's done in concert with so many people that are based locally while also balancing the central sort of global perspective. I think that's sort of the best way to manage it.
Right, right. Sounds good. So, Jenny, back to you. How would you sort of, from your perspective, define like the core benefits of open access?
Sure. Since I'm coming from a library perspective, it might be a little different. But the core benefits of open access for me are kind of threefold. The Obviously the rapid dissemination of the results of scholarly research with no restrictions or paywalls is
Mm.
pretty much at the core of open access. And along with that comes increased usage, increased impact, greater public engagement. And finally, what's becoming even more clear and more important at the heart of open access is creating a more equitable research ecosystem. So things like conversations around accessibility and DEI initiatives, um, and things like that are becoming more and more essential to the process.
Hmm. Excellent. Yeah, it might seem like an obvious question, but I'm asking it because we have we're fortunate to have, Jenny, who's a librarian, and Emily, who's coming obviously from the publisher perspective. So it's kind of interesting to have each of you, talk about these. And so, Emily, what would you say from your end? What the core benefits of open access are? I'm sure there's some overlap with what Jenny just said too.
Absolutely. I mean, I think we're coming from a very similar perspective. I mean,
Hmm.
so much of it is about that broadening of access, and access to sort of verified scholarship. The ability then that a broader audience can engage with that research, and we see that sort of in looking at various metrics we can see. So where do you see downloads when something's open access compared to where it's closed? I think that we see that everybody in the system sees that across the board, that you just get broader geographic spread of readership. And you just know that more people are able to engage with it. I mean, I think it is, of course, just one part of the picture, but I think that the fact that we've been living in a time where misinformation, false information, has been, such it's caused such clear challenges, that especially where we sit on the publisher side, ensuring that we shift to a more accessible ecosystem means that we're able to ensure that verified scholarship is part of those conversations rather than being gated, and that it's not just sort of misinformation that you can find on the internet, but also that sort of scholarship that becomes that's findable by anybody. So I think that's at the core of it.
Hmm. So, open access, it's always been sort of the irony of OA that it sounds so amazing and attainable, and that we all should live in an open access world, but there are some significant hurdles still. Let's talk, and so I'd like to talk about those limitations. Where do researchers, publishers, librarians, and readers each typically hit roadblocks or hurdles in the OA ecosystem? And Jenny, I'll go back to you for that.
Sure. Well, as a librarian working with faculty, with researchers, our major roadblock or a major hurdle is APC's article processing charges. And these
Yeah.
are fees that the author pays to make their article open access in certain journals. And just a few weeks ago, 40 scientists quit their editorial positions at a journal in protest of high APCs, and these can get into the many thousands of dollars. And there's many reasons why APCs are a thing, why they exist, but it truthfully it is a hurdle for a lot of people, and a lot of times that also affects how people consider publishing open access. It's lower down on the priorities for a lot of researchers. The other limitation that I have found is misconceptions about quality. You hear a lot. An open access journal. Oh, it's predatory. It's not real. It's very low quality. It's not peer reviewed, and
Mm.
all of these things are not true. Any journal could be considered predatory by certain criteria. Even the most highly rated journals have instances of research fraud and research integrity problems. So it's not about the fact that it's open. It's more about the uh,
Quality
what
control or
quality control,
yeah.
whatever's going on behind the scenes.
Mhm.
So
So I'm curious, Jenny, like you mentioned the APCs and if you could just sort of elaborate on what the challenge is. Is it coming from, the researchers having to raise that money through grants, or is it just sort of, what makes it a hurdle for them?
sure, a lot of them don't. In my experience, a lot of them don't know that they have to pay an APC until
Mm,
they're hit with that invoice.
yeah,
And then they, in my line of work, they come to me needing funding to pay that article processing charge. So it's a matter of lack of knowledge.
yeah,
It's a matter of lack of, if they do know that they have to pay an APC, they might not know exactly how expensive it is. And the other issue that I see personally is people who have funding are not aware that they can oftentimes, especially if it's federally funded, build that APC charge into their budgets. So for a lot of people, from my perspective, it's just lack of knowledge going into the process.
right, right. Okay, and then Emily, what would you say?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's a lot of that I would echo. I mean, I think that one thing to note, of course, that is that we're still in a very transitional period. We've been in a system that operated in certain ways for quite a while. It's not necessarily a system that changes very quickly, either on the academic side, on the behavioral side with researchers and so forth. And then there are so many systems that have been in place and sort of are all leaning on each other in such a way that it makes it difficult to change one part without also changing other parts of it. So, for instance, if you are going to mandate authors publish open access, you really do need to see that echoed on the promotion and tenure side. So all of these pieces need to work together to push the system in a different direction. So I think that is a hurdle, but I think we're seeing sort of enough changes. I do think that it's going to be incremental, and if you think about how much change has happened in the last few years, particularly through the COVID pandemic, it does make me feel hopeful that we do have the space for change, and that we I think sometimes you can feel a little impatient that it's not all at once.
Hmm.
But I think that with the discussions about APC based models or the questions about equity, certainly looking at how we work in cooperation at scale with an institution, with a library, to make sure that the burden of cost doesn't fall on the researcher or on the reader. And we've seen that in the last couple of years, models evolving, even read and publish models and transformative agreements evolving, new collective models. And I don't think we've seen the end of it yet. And hopefully, at least so far, I've found that having librarians as partners, there's an incredible willingness to sort of come to the table and try to work through these changes and see how we can push each other into a better place. The other thing that I think is difficult, and that's a hurdle that I can speak to from the publisher side, and I'm certainly not speaking for libraries, but I think that there's a similar sort of piece where when you work in a service role, which I think publishers generally are, part of your job is to make what you do invisible. And then when you're changing to a system where you have to make that more visible, it's a difficult conversation. I think we're all trying to learn how to do that better.
Mm.
So I think sort of being able to put that out from the publisher side and say, this is the work that we're doing. This is why it matters to the system. This is how it makes the system better. That's also something of a hurdle on the publisher side for us to just get a bit better about the ways that we make that visible and how we do that in cooperation.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. You just heard from Emily Farrell, Global Commercial Director for Open Research at Taylor & Francis, and Jenny Towns, Open Access Librarian at Emory University. This series is brought to you with support from Overdrive. Join us next week when we explore the role librarians play in supporting and advancing open access initiatives and policies, how that role might change, and we'll explore those same questions on the publisher side as well. As always, underwriting opportunities for the Authority File podcast are directed by Choice's advertising manager, Pam Marino, and all of our episodes are produced and edited by Choice's digital media producer, Sabrina Kofer, with support from digital media assistant, Ashley Roy. That's all for this week. Thanks for joining us.